Reboots by their nature are very divisive since it's generally throwing out everything people know about something and restarting from scratch. Sometimes a franchise requires a big shakeup like that, other times they give it one anyway and it just ends up also working out, or they're reboots that just have a cursed legacy. So I'll talk about video game reboots and how they try to shift things up drastically, and also, because I keep saying it, no, I do not count Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom as reboots, let alone a franchise that constantly has different iterations of locales and aspects. So no, if I were to count Breath of the Wild as a reboot, I have to count so many Zelda entries in the franchise as reboots because of how different they shuffle continuity. And no, I don't care about your goddamn Hyperdimension timeline. This case is still wild to me. Hyperdimension Neptunia Mark II, the second entry in the Neptunia franchise, and the series got rebooted, simply because the first entry didn't have anywhere to actually go, because it was a self-conclusive story. Once we that game's true ending, you basically saw everything that happened in the world, and there was nowhere to go unless they followed a new cast of characters. So, Mark II basically rebooted everything, changed the continuity of how characters met, changed the plot, everything, turned into something new that they could then take that as a base and use that for future entries, and how it then connects to like the third game, Neptunia Victory, or the next metal game after that being Neptunia V2, and so on and so forth. Now you may be wondering, the first entry did get a remake, so does that help connect stuff? And the answer is no, because Rebirth 1 is actually its own thing. It starts out following the premise of the original game's plot, but deviates constantly and jokes about the fact that it's deviating from the original plot, and even has characters acknowledge this is not the same continuity as the first entry, or even the same continuity as Mark II. So Rebirth 1 takes place in a completely separate dimension from those entries. So even the remake of the first game isn't connected, and Mark II, being the reboot of the franchise, basically became the base, which even Rebirth 2, the remake of the second entry, still keeps itself as a base of the franchise that is used forward when it comes to the mainline entries of Neptunia. Star Fox technically has two reboots, or some call them reimaginings, so you can go either or really with it. But you had the original Star Fox on Super Nintendo, then after many years, Nintendo released the scrapped Star Fox 2, which, if you were to count that one as being followed of Star Fox 1, those two games follow their own continuity, so they're rather consistent. Star Fox 64, which is generally the one people think about, is basically a reboot of the original Star Fox game, changing up things or to have its own style. Like I said, some could argue reimagining, but it alters stuff like the tone or even layout locales, so you could also argue it is a reboot of the original Star Fox game. And you have Star Fox Zero, which also does its own spin on the same idea of the original Star Fox, doing things differently when it comes to how it does things, to the point, once again, you could call Star Fox Zero a reboot, and I've seen more people willing to accept calling Zero a reboot, more so when they're willing to call Star Fox 64 a reboot. So, two entries in the Star Fox franchise basically was, let's just do Star Fox 1 again, and there are some people who wish they would do another Star Fox game. They don't just do Star Fox 1 again, because one of those things where the most known entries are the ones that basically just, hey, we'll do the first game again. Well, they dropped the Star Fox Direct, and the new Star Fox game just tells Star Fox is yet again another rendition of Star Fox 64. So, that comment I made about hopefully not Star Fox 64 has not aged well in the slightest, so This franchise is now mostly basically just reboots of the first title over and over. We now have 4 different reboots as remakes of Star Fox 1, Star Fox 64, Star Fox 64 3D, Star Fox Zero, and now the new upcoming Star Fox. So, I'm glad I didn't miss it yet because this is hilarious. Bomberman Act Zero, taking the premise of original Bomberman and trying to make it more serious. Really want to earn that T right on the front of box art. Taking the idea of, oh, Bomberman wants to escape to the surface in order to hopes to become human, and turning it into being subjected to experimentation and becoming the Bomberman, needing to survive and escape to the surface of this awful experimentation. Like, you see the ideas where it's the same concept of Bomberman, but just try to make it way more serious, everything, and trying to fit a new tone. This game, as I got read, did not do well with, well, many cite it's because of the tone and everything when it comes to Bomberman Act Zero and everything. I think the reason it didn't do well because it has apparently no local multiplayer, which is the biggest sin you can have for a Bomberman game. Like, once again, I know the tone is so out there and everything, but at the same time, Bomber Girl, or Bomber Girl Rainbow as it's known nowadays, is a team-based base-destroying game that still does well in Japanese arcades and has a Japan-only PC port, so I don't think the tone itself is what threw people off, especially since, despite being released on Xbox 360, you still have to go through the 99 levels without saving at all. So, once again, you can see ideas where it's like, what are you doing here? In terms of the gameplay wise. But, once again, no local multiplayer in a Bomberman game. Your arcade game, meanwhile, is a flat out team-based game. What are you doing here? I, of course, have to mention DMC Devil May Cry. Made a whole video on it. I enjoy that game, and know it still gets hate to this day, but it did a lot good gameplay-wise when it came to how well Dante controls, how fun it is to just do the combat. I don't like the bosses, but it does have good levels. Also, the fact that the Virgil section is the only time Virgil has his own dedicated levels and everything when it comes to playing as Virgil, a Devil May Cry game, so they really went the extra mile, even if the Virgil section was essentially a pre-order bonus, so it doesn't have as much budget as time to cook as the Dante portions. But this reboot was disliked based on conception, and I'm being honest here, I saw that initial teaser, didn't like it either, but the more I saw of it, the more interesting it looked. It's just more the fact of, I like what the story is going for, I just don't like the actual writing of the characters, and many people, it wasn't just that, it's also developers, but that's a longer story. Either way, I enjoyed the game. I made a video saying it has sequel potential and everything, but it is still a reboot that generally people will despise if you bring it up, or maybe you'll find the fans who do enjoy it and everything. So it still has its fans, the fact that they weren't enough people at launch to basically fill the Capcom test of 2 million sales, even after Capcom even lowered the amount as well to below 2 million sales. But I still think it's a good title and everything, especially nowadays. It's so weird they never ported the definitive edition to PC, only made it a console exclusive thing. I also want to add that no matter how many people complain on the surface about the DMC reboot, they enjoy the spoils of it, considering without the reboot, Virgil wouldn't have like half or not more than half of his Yamato moveset in DMC4 Special Edition DMC5, which also includes the Perfect Judgment Cut mechanic, or the fact that DMC5, Virgil wouldn't have Doppelganger, stuff like that, or you wouldn't have the dramatic music build-up mechanic when it came to your style ranking in DMC5, considering that was inspired by the dramatic music and sting from the DMC reboot. Like, whether people want to admit it or not, the reboot did do a lot for the franchise and had features constantly kept, but people just pretend as if it didn't come from that game specifically. Mega Man Maverick Hunter X is a reboot of the X series and was supposed to start an entire new continuity, but Maverick Hunter X, for whatever reason, didn't end up doing too well, despite still being the great Mega Man X game. Granted, the smaller screen size probably didn't help, but it did have stuff to boast, whether it be in some continuity by making story changes, or also the Deus Sigma OVA that highlighted the completely different pathway this version of the events of Mega Man X were going to pan out. You also have the added dialogue when it came to X going after the Mavericks, adding more cruelty to Sigma, especially when you get to the boss remaster and everything. On top of the fact that in this version, you get the exclusive ability to play as Vile. Yeah, he's basically doing the same campaign as X, but he has a completely unique gameplay style and even completely unique final boss sequence as well. It's one of those things that, as a kid playing this game, I thought was great, but I mean, as a kid back then, often nowadays I still see people not know it was a reboot and think the events of that game don't contradict the main X games when they absolutely do, whether it be the events of Day of Sigma, the dialogue in the game, or even just the fact that Dr. Kane is killed off in this game when obviously he still shows up in X3, so that can't be the case. It's just one of those things where it's a reboot, but it's a reboot often just treated as a one-to-one remake, when it is not a one-to-one remake. It was trying to do its own thing, but I guess you could argue it didn't go different enough if people think it is more of a one-to-one remake than a reboot of the X series. Alone in the Dark 2008, a reboot of Alone in the Dark series that tried to do its own entire new thing, with its biggest issue probably being its ambition. From being the pioneer of the survival horror series to now trying this more third-person, but also first-person shooter aspect, puzzle-based, exploration, platforming, a lot of stuff the game has going for it, driving sections, open sections, like, this is the stuff the game does, why its biggest flaw is the fact that it's ambitious. Although I will find it interesting how when people talk about this game, I never really see people bring up the fact that when they ported it to PS3, they actually updated the game to address issues people had with the original release of it, so the PS3 version would be the more go-to version of the game for some fixes and some exclusive content not featuring the original. By the way, this game is mostly known for one of its endings and the goofy dialogue in it, but just one of those things that I've seen some try to say, oh, I tried to copy Resident Evil, which you can see some influence, but with how different it tries to be, I can't really say it went from pioneer survival horror to copying Resident Evil 4. Like, sure, I guess in the case of being a third-person shooter and everything, since RE4 basically invented cover-based third-person shooters. By the way, this game specifically just tries to do a whole lot, and despite its reception, it apparently was a financial success, so good for them, I guess. I also forgot to mention that Alone in the Dark 2008 also goes for the more episodic nature with its storytelling, something that, I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily at that time in particular, but people did love trying to be episodic in their games for some reason. It's just a weird trend I never really fully understood. I understand episodic releases, but not episodic feeling when you already have a full game designed to be played in a row. You also have games that are soft reboots. The idea of wanting to shake things up, but also keep the same continuity. Or I'm gonna call it having your cake and trying to eat it too. Such as what's been going on ever since Doom 2016, where they essentially soft rebooted a series but kept the continuity. But it also led to the funny confusion where I still see people not know that Doom Guy for Visual Games and the Doom Slayer are the same person and try to treat them as two separate people. or people who get mad when people refer to Doomslayer as Doom Guy because how dare you call him Doom Guy when now he's the Slayer, even though he was technically always the Slayer, and I believe the Slayer is more of a nickname the demons gave him as opposed to that being his actual name since, well, he was Doom Guy. Sakura Wars 2019, or Shin Sakura Wars, also being a soft reboot that just wanted to focus on a new cast of characters while keeping old continuity. Which is weird since other entries were able to do that, but okay. But you still have the fact that, for example, the new Sakura character in this game being inspired by the Sakura of previous entries and stuff like that with the continuity. The issue with having their kid trying to eat it too in this case is more the fact that in order to try and excuse why the previous characters aren't around, they basically made a writing decision that was so bad, it basically one of the reasons this game's reputation created in Japan. So there's a case where if you're a new fan, you might enjoy it. I mean, I still wouldn't because I don't think the game's good. But if you are someone who is familiar with the franchise, then certain revelations will piss you the hell off. God of War 2018 is also another weird case of a soft reboot. It's been the fact of you want to have this new setting and new fresh start to help with new fans getting into the franchise, but it also means with the same continuity, there are certain aspects that just won't work out as well if a player is unfamiliar with the games that came before it. That's also why not having those games readily available is also a weird decision, even though at the time of this video, they are now going to remake God of War 1, 2, and 3. Still excessive in my opinion, but we'll see what happens. So it's one of those cases where you want to help new fans not get lost in what's going on, but you still want to have these big moments that basically really work if you know the previous titles. Why it's baffling people try to bash their previous God of War games before 2018, when this game is also in reverence of those games as well. It's a follow-up. It still has respect for those titles, which just weirdly the fan base itself doesn't for some reason. Or at least the fan base, specifically for those who played the 2018 game and Ragnarok specifically. Soul Calibur 6 is also a soft reboot, setting itself between Soul Caliburs 1 and 2, and trying to keep certain aspects of continuity, but then also trying to do its one entire new thing, whether it be bringing in lore aspects that were added upon, and stuff like Soul Calibur 4 and 5, or the fact that you'll even have remnants of the original timeline for the franchise get brought in and mentioned, or even try to have influence on this timeline of events, such as Cassandra's storyline in Soul Calibur 6, having her directly meet her original timeline self and everything. So what is a soft reboot is a case where they're trying to do something different, and that's really why I want to see Soul Calibur 7. Listen, the stuff that Cassandra in this game learns from her story mode, I needs to see what she does with that knowledge in Soul Calibur 7. And then you also have the other story mode with the creator character that is also its own, I believe, separate continuity as well from the main story mode of the named characters. So there is that as well when it comes to Soul Calibur 6 trying to be a sort of reboot for the franchise. I wouldn't say that Soul Calibur 5 had nowhere to go, especially when the tagline of this franchise is a tale of swords and swords, eternally retold. So they could have just gone to your storyline with Soul Edge and Soul Calibur eventually coming back and fighting a new host, because, let's be real, other Soul Calibur games had them being destroyed, depending on what character's ending you were viewing as well. Or it could just be Darth Vader and Soul Calibur 4 as biblical levels agreed by dual-wielding both Soul Edge and Soul Calibur. So, there's that too. The Castlevania Lords of Shadow trilogy, which also made videos on being completely different universe thanks to the reboot, and while some people don't really care for the more 3D action kind of gameplay that they go for, at least 1 and 2. Then Mirrors of Fate goes for more side-scrolling action game, which Mirrors of Fate gets so much hate, and people generally can't even explain why they hate it. They just say, oh, this is the reason Metroid Dread's gonna do terribly, and then this game is also good, and Metroid Dread is also great. But for some reason, people constantly use it as a source of saying why Mercury Steam is very bad and will implode, even though there are other reasons why the company would implode. It's more how they treat their employees kind of thing. Either way, the weirdest excuse I've seen is people complain about, oh, I can't get into it because the lore is all weird. It's like, okay, what do you mean lore is all weird? Oh, the fact that Simon is son of Trevor and Trevor is son of Gabriel in this universe. Okay, what's wrong with that? Just so weird. Like, acting as if they weren't all related in the original timeline, except for Gabriel. They didn't even exist in the original timeline and stuff like that. Or people complaining, why is Simon Irish with red hair? I mean, he's had red hair before. I don't understand why the red hair's a complaint now. As for Irish thing, well, all European. What you want from them? So, I just complaints I see that just people make every reason why they should never touch the Lord of the Shadow series, or the most overused complaint of, oh, Lord of the Shadow 2 stealth sessions go on for so long, and the stealth sessions are so short, and you do have the ability to kill enemies. They just automatically respawn if you do, which is kind of dumb, but like I said, they're generally very short stealth segments, and you can just break them with the mist form. So, anyway, that's still a huge complaint Lord of the Shadow games keep getting, and the fact that Lord of the Shadow 1 is the best-selling Castlevania entry, although I've seen recently some debate, was it best-selling at full price, was it best-selling after a discount, when is the best-selling stay? Either way, the one people generally think about is still Symphony of the Night and everything, but Lord of the Shadow still does have its own massive fan base, where I help people try to pretend like it doesn't. The Tomb Raider reboot trilogy, I feel like I'm obligated to mention. You know, I've only played the first of the Tomb Raider trilogy that came out in 2013, and did greatly enjoy it, even if the anime AI would sometimes do the most baffling things. Die! I do remember back when 2013 game was new, people did have jokes about, well, it wants to be something different. It also felt like it was trying so hard to be different, they would actively avoid doing anything similar to the original games, such as people joking how in gameplay you couldn't have Lara dual-wield guns, which was something she was known to do in the previous entries, but sure there is a segment in the story where she does, but the fact that gameplay-wise, you as the player couldn't do it because we wanted to focus on the bow, which was a very versatile weapon and helped with puzzle solving, so it was a cool thing to have in the game and everything. It was one of those things where the reboot trilogy was a case of trying so hard to want to be something different, which is the point with reboot, so nothing wrong with that whole entire thing. Although I remember some people saying like, oh, the reboot trilogy was hampered by being Xbox only for Titan's exclusivity. Not really. I think people just didn't really like the follow-up games as much as the 2013 title. I just want to ramble about when it comes to the topic of reboots and different ways they try to handle the idea of something completely new. Like, no matter what, there would be someone opposed to a reboot. Even if it was a franchise that wasn't exactly the most well-liked, it still probably had its fans who won't like the fact of just throwing everything out, or how some will argue that if you're gonna do a reboot, you might as well just do something new entirely at that point because you're throwing everything out and starting from scratch. But as shown, there are some games that do want to use the same base that they had, just rearrange the pieces to be something new. And there are also more games I see people go back and forth and claim this is a reboot, and I just disagree. Like, people say Resident Evil 4 is a soft reboot of the franchise. No, just because RE4 has jack all to do with the rest of the franchise since Umbrella was done with off-screen doesn't make it a soft reboot. Or Resident Evil 7 is a soft reboot. No, not really. No. At that point, it's like saying Grand Theft Auto 3 is a reboot of the franchise because the classic games have their own continuity that is separate from the PS2 entries, and that's called the 3D era. And then the HD era has their own separate continuity. That is why Grand Theft Auto 5 and San Andreas can both feature Los Santos, but the events of San Andreas did not happen within the continuity of Grand Theft Auto 5. And then you have the online universe. In Grand Theft Auto 5 Online, it has its own separate continuity. So technically, that is like, what, 3 to 4 separate soft reboots? And no, they just want to have their own different continuity and everything. I'm not going to count those as entire reboots or soft reboots of the franchise and everything. I asked my brother, and according to him, based on description, he himself would in fact count Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7 as soft reboots, even if they do tie into a larger series entirely. But since they technically don't require information from previous entries and everything, despite, in the case of Resident Evil 4, having a returning protagonist, he thinks they do count under the soft reboot umbrella and thinks that I am in the wrong when it comes to this. So like I said about it, go out there, play games that are reboots you enjoy, or maybe you don't like reboots and just prefer a franchise instead improved with a direct sequel. Which I was gonna add the Body Commando 2009 game on this video, but things point to it with a reboot and a sequel. To which I go, it doesn't even make any sense. How is it a hard reboot and a sequel at the exact same time? Anyways, I gotta say, alrighty then, good day.